Hello, my name is Luli Chaluleo, and I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition for Worldwide Operations.
And I'm Zamir Rayani, and I am a Principal Recruiter for the Devices and Services Organization.
We are so excited to join you today on Career Day. As many of you have probably heard, Amazon has a peculiar interviewing process. So we want to spend some time today just talking through that process and talking about interviewing in general. All right, let's dive in. So, Zamir, you make it past the phone screen or the assessment, and you're invited to come on site, but right now, obviously a lot of things are virtual, but you're here for an interview. What should you prepare for? What should you expect?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting times, and I would say that the preparation has not changed too much since the pandemic. Some of the things are similar, right? So the basics. Get your resume, make sure that thing is in tip-top shape, right? No typos, make sure it reflects your current experience. It talks about the things that you've delivered, right? It kind of covers the basics. The bigger part, I think, and the more important piece, and what you alluded to earlier, which is what makes us peculiar, is the leadership principles, right? That's something that's super, super important for the way we interview at Amazon. And I would say it probably makes a lot of sense to spend a good amount of time thinking about your own experience, right? Your professional experience, and maybe writing down one or two examples from your experience that relate to each of these leadership principles, right? And this isn't like a script, something you're just going to read off of. But what it is, it kind of gets your mind, it kind of frames things, right? And gets you into that mindset of like, hey, these things are really important to the company. And it helps educate you and kind of inform you as to what the culture will be like, as well as how your specific kind of background and experiences may actually relate to that and may kind of play into that, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure, I guess a question for you might be, when you were interviewing 9-ish years ago, right? What did you do to prepare, right? Was it different than what you would recommend someone doing now, for example?
Yeah, I'm not sure how I got the job, Zamir. But one thing that I did do to prepare was to learn a lot about Amazon. So I did go onto the website and just learn about all the different things that we were doing. I mean, 9 years ago, we weren't in as many businesses, but I did make it a point to try to learn about all the different businesses that Amazon did have. At the time, I'm not sure that my recruiter told me about the leadership principles or even STAR interviewing, which we'll get to. So I was very surprised on site that day, and honestly had felt a little underprepared. But I did notice that they were interviewing me for specific things, and I now know that those are the leadership principles. But why? If you could explain to everybody today, why does Amazon interview against those leadership principles?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that makes us peculiar as compared to a lot of other companies is a lot of companies do have tenets or things that, pillars of the company, things that they say, we stand for. And sometimes those are things that do impact the culture, but sometimes they don't. They're just kind of things that are scribed on a wall, for example, right? And you may look at them every now and then. The difference is in our environment and with this company, with Amazon specifically, is these are kind of part and parcel to everything that we do, right? So in the context of the interview, we definitely use them to, figure out, hey, is this person going to be a good fit within this company, right? Do we want to hire this person? But well beyond that, right? These leadership principles are used in everyday business decisions, right? We use them when we're going through reviews for talent. We use them across the board, right? When we think about new products and services, for example, right, we're thinking about these leadership principles, right? Are we starting with the customer and working backwards, right? Are we showing that true customer obsession, right? Super, super important. So I think that's the difference, right? It's one of those things where it will be useful for your interview, but as you begin your Amazon journey, it will be useful well beyond, right, just that initial interview. And it'll be useful for you through your entire kind of journey with this company. So really good to kind of familiarize yourself with them and get comfortable talking about them. Not about memorization, right? We're not going to say, interview question 1, recite all of them, right? Nobody's going to ask you to do that. But really, it will really kind of set sort of the tone of what your experience will be like at the company because they are so foundational, but as well as sort of like elemental to our entire kind of way we do business and how we kind of run this company. So super important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having worked here so long, even now in my day-to-day, I'm constantly anchoring myself in the leadership principles and making sure that I'm thinking about them when making decisions. And so we're really interviewing people and trying to understand how they can deploy those leadership principles in their day-to-day.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that too, because it reminds me of like, we definitely use them in business, but sometimes I find myself using them at home as well, right? I'm like, you know what? That person didn't really earn my trust by doing this and that, or, oh, I had such a great experience at the restaurant. Their customer obsession was like next level, right? And it starts to kind of permeate in some other parts, and then I try to catch myself like, oh, that's really funny, right? It's really becomes part of like the culture and the way you think.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, 100%. I think my kids probably know some of the leadership principles from telling them.
My dog definitely knows some
Your
of them
dog.
for sure. Yeah.
That's great. The type of interviewing that we do at Amazon is called behavioral-based interviewing. Mm-hmm. Can you explain, like, what does that really mean? What's a behavioral-based interview?
Yeah, so we like to ask a lot of questions that kind of talk about, like, give me an example of when you did this, or tell me about a time when this happened, right? Mm-hmm. And these are sort of like intros to, hey, we want to learn about what you did in a specific situation or a specific position that you were in, right? And the idea being that we kind of believe that past behaviors are good indicators of like future behaviors as well. Yeah. And so we ask a lot of those behavioral-based questions as a result. So what you won't see, or what you shouldn't see typically with us, is how many pennies will it take to fill this room, for example, right? We don't ask like trick questions. Yeah. We stay away from those. We're really interested in specifics about, hey, what types of situations have you been in, right? What were the stakes? How did you measure it, right? What did you learn in that experience, right? Lots of different questions around kind of understanding what you did, why you did it, how you did it, right? If you reflect on that experience, what would you do differently? Mm-hmm. I think that one of the key things, instead of just the what, is I would say the how and the why.
Yeah.
Because what one person does in a situation may be very unique or specific to that particular situation. But if you can sort of understand their mindset, the thinking behind why they did something or how they sort of undertook it, right? Did they keep people advised of what was going on, right? Did they kind of look around corners and anticipate maybe some problems that could arise if something wasn't handled? Did they have good sort of mitigating strategies in place? If we can understand the way someone's mind works, that's very exciting, because then you can apply that to a bunch of different scenarios, right, that are just beyond the what of one particular situation. So when we ask these behavioral sort of questions, that's what we're interested in understanding, is how one's mind works, how you processed it, sort of how do you work your way through these situations, right? And that's really interesting, and that's really fun to do, honestly. Like, yeah. I love interviewing because I'm just curious about people and sort of what they do and why and how. But it's really interesting to learn about the way people's minds works, because it's very different for many people, and I love that. I just think that you could put 10 different people in the same situation, and you might get 10 different paths to the same outcome. That's awesome, or different outcomes as well. So yeah. It's really interesting.
Yeah, well, I love interviewing as well. I think together we've done thousands of interviews for Amazon, and then with throughout our careers. Now, a really just a tactical advice for behavioral-based interviewing is to practice the STAR method. Mm-hmm. So situation, task, action, and result. So all the different things that you just kind of chatted about. But anything else that you think we should highlight on the STAR method? I think the part that you talked about on why you did something, how you weighed different options and why you chose the one is the one that comes to mind for me. But, in the STAR method, what's something that pops for you?
It's interesting. The STAR method is one of those things where I don't like to think of it as a prescriptive approach, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we don't expect our candidates to say, here was the situation, here was the task, here was the action, here was the result, right? It's sort of something to get one in the mindset of, hey, as I'm thinking about talking about my experience, at some point, be sure to kind of cover off each of those different areas, right? We're definitely interested in sort of the anecdotes and, and like the results and the data and things like that. But what I would say is, it's less important about the structure and more important about kind of the actual content, right? So we may jump around a little bit, but what's really important, I would say, when you ask like of that piece, is the results are really interesting to us, right? We really like to measure whenever possible, and we understand that while not every example can be quantified, right? Meaning you didn't necessarily have a before and an after and in a specific metric. If that is available, right? We love a really good sort of qualitative or quantitative data point to kind of bolster a great story, right? Of course, we hope for positive outcomes, but that doesn't always happen, right? Meaning a product may fail at some point, right? Look at the Fire Phone, right? I mean, that was a pretty big failure. We learned a ton from that.
I had one.
And you had one, great.
I got one
of
absolutely.
The few and proud, right?
Yeah.
So there were good things in that failure, right? And we learned a ton that we have since applied. So some of it is like, with the result, it's the reflection as well. It's like, okay, what data do you have to show it was successful? How do you know it was successful? And if it wasn't, let's be introspective. Let's think about looking backwards. What could we have done maybe to get to a different outcome? Or how did we take what we learned there and apply that in a future product, right? Or project, something like that. So STAR is great, but remember, it's not a prescriptive thing. Just be thinking about that in your mind. It's like, I'd love to cover off all those dimensions of any particular story that I'm talking about. And again, think about data too. We're very data driven here, but we recognize that, it's not always available. But if it is, we'd love to know what story that data is telling us as well.
Yeah. The one thing is, though, I think the situation, I think about that a lot. Right now, we have a lot of people looking for jobs, and perhaps they're looking for jobs in industries that are different than the one that they're in. And so I think one piece of advice would be to really make sure you're not too specific about the situation. You might be interviewing with somebody who doesn't know anything about your industry. So I tend to do that a lot. I've been with Amazon for 9 years, and I may talk in a way that is so specific to Amazon that if you're giving an example, it might be hard to follow if you aren't working at Amazon. So my rule of thumb is to explain something to my sister who's an ER nurse. And if she can understand the situation and the whole example, then I think that is a good way to frame a response. Because I know when I've interviewed folks, sometimes I spend more time trying to understand that situation because I'm from a different industry. And so just finding a good balance of how to explain the situation in front of you to somebody who may not know anything about the industry that you're coming from, I think is a good tip.
Yeah, that's great. I often tell people the candidates that I'm talking to are mostly smarter than I am and work in a lot of different areas. And so I say the same thing. I say, explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old and assume I know nothing about, like, if you're a user experience designer, assume I know nothing about that and try to put it in terms that even I can understand. But that brings up a really interesting point too with like STAR as well. I think another tip is try not to talk for minutes on end, right? If you're in an interview and you're asked a question, the interviewer's job is to kind of elicit that information from you, and they will ask lots of really good follow-up questions. So don't feel like you need to explain, if you're interviewing with Amazon or anywhere, the entire story end to end with everything in one fell swoop, right? We like our interviews to feel more like this, right? More sort of conversational back and forth rather than, one mic and just like hold it there for minutes on end. It's like, it should flow, hopefully. And we recognize too, because to your point earlier, like, you've been here 9 years now. That's a long time, but I'm sure you remember your interviewing experience with Amazon.
Oh yeah.
Right? And we all know that it is intimidating, and we've all, the nice thing is, I think, to remember is that every one of our candidates, as you're coming in to talk to us, just remember, like, we've all been there as well, right? And we remember what that's like, and remember that's not easy. And so I think, keeping that in, the further we get away from that, right? The longer you've been here, it can be harder to remember, but maybe as an interviewing team, we're reminding ourselves of that. We've been in that chair across the table before or across the other side of the lens. And that's really important, right? To have that compassion and to understand that the people that we're talking to are not professional interviewees, right? They do lots of different things, as do we, right? And so having a bit of grace and being understanding and knowing that, it's a conversation, right? And everything isn't going to go perfectly and smoothly every time. That's okay. We expect that. We are all human, and that's part of the fun of being human, right? Is little things that you kind of don't expect and all that. So I like how you talked about the STAR method, and I like how it's really important to think about that. But again, it shouldn't be a long soliloquy, right? It should just be, hey, back and forth. Interviewer will ask lots of follow-up questions. They'll give examples, and so on and so forth. So that's the ideal interview in that situation, right?
And I think the one thing I hope that all candidates, I wish all candidates knew is that when I'm sitting down at least to interview a candidate, I want them to get the job, right? I've set aside time to meet this person, and I really want them to get the job. And so I feel like that's an important thing for candidates to know is, we're inviting you to come in and to interview, whether it's with Amazon or another company, and we're rooting for you. We want you to get there.
Yeah, the best possible outcome in that scenario is the candidate gets the job, right? Because obviously the candidate hopefully will be very excited about the opportunity. And as a company, as Amazon, we get a great Amazonian that can go on to do amazing things, right?
So we have a lot of different roles available. What happens if, the first job that you come in for isn't a match? What should an applicant do?
Yeah, it's interesting, and not every job is going to be a match, right? And so it's a really interesting question. I would say that what we hire for is we try to hire for Amazon first, meaning we try to think, is this candidate a good fit for the company, right? That's the first and most important question to answer. Beyond that, then, there are a ton of different opportunities and teams like we've talked about. So even if that first opportunity doesn't necessarily pan out or work out the way that we initially thought, right? There are so many other opportunities. So, what we encourage is to don't let that stop you, right? Keep looking for other places, other opportunities that are interesting, and keep going forward, because you never know, just because it isn't a good fit for one role or location or team doesn't mean it's not a good fit for all, right? So that is really, really important to remember. And as we continue to grow as a company and offer more opportunities, that's only going to become even more true.
I think we have a lot of really good tips here, but there are two things that I want to make sure we touch upon. And one of them is just really bringing your whole self to the interview and bringing just authenticity. While it's very important to prepare and learn about Amazon, interviewing goes two ways. And so you're interviewing the company, you're interviewing Amazon as much as we're interviewing you, and just really showing up authentically, being really true about who you are, and then preparing questions that you really have to make sure that Amazon's the right fit for you is really important. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree. And I think to build on what you said, asking really good questions of your interviewers is such a great idea. I think not just to learn about the company, like you mentioned, but also to learn the perspective of the people that you're talking to, right? Just like you and I, we've been around for about the same amount of time, but we have very different experiences. And so this is like a great opportunity for for candidates to interview us and find out, hey, what do you like about it, right? What keeps you here? What challenges are there in your role, right? Where are the opportunities, do you think, for Amazon to improve? Like, ask the really tough questions, right? Because to your point, it should be a two-way interview. And we understand that in this job market, right, there are so many openings that chances are if they're talking to us, they're probably talking to a lot of other companies as well. And so it's incumbent on us to kind of give them a great experience, right, as candidates, and to ensure that, we give them the opportunity to talk to us and learn about us as well. So I love that call out. It's really great. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Hopefully there was some great tips that you all gleaned from this session, and we wish you the best of luck in your interviewing with Amazon and your career beyond.